Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribed. At 1,000 subscribers, I'll be posting a special video. He yanked the router and stuffed it in his jacket. My screen froze mid-pitch and the timer kept ticking. "I need the internet back," I said through clenched teeth. He held the door with his foot and stared me down. I reached for the jacket and he lifted it higher. "I am Mara, 31, and I knew this was deliberate." My pulse hammered and the client pinged me on chat. 5 minutes, I typed over data that refused to move. He tilted his head like a coach before a penalty. "Pick home over them," he whispered under his breath. I grabbed my phone and switched to hotspot. The call reconnected and 8 faces blinked alive. "Quick update," I said while walking past him. He hovered near the hallway and blocked the bathroom. I kept speaking and sent the deck with shaking thumbs. A bowl slipped as he brushed the counter with purpose. Porcelain cracked and rolled toward the sink like a cue ball. I muted and bent to pick pieces with steady hands. "You keep choosing strangers," he muttered while dusting shards. I unmuted and finished the update without blinking. The meeting ended and my team posted thumbs up. He leaned against the fridge and tapped the router case. "Friday," he said like a final score that never moves. I stood straight and matched his stare with mine. "You do not decide my paycheck," I answered slowly. He opened his banking app and flashed the withdrawal. 2,000 gone felt like a trap with polished edges. "Investing in us," he said while smoothing his hair. My jaw locked and I checked my notifications again. A second charge sat pending like a countdown. I walked to the entry and tried the car keys. The hook was empty and the bowl was light. "Where are my keys?" I asked without raising volume. He shrugged and adjusted his jacket with the router. I ordered a ride and watched his smile flicker. On the sidewalk, he followed 2 steps behind me. "Let the job wait," he breathed near my ear. The driver pulled up and I slid into the back. He bent closer like he might climb in too. I lifted my phone and hit record without comment. "Friday solves it," he said while tapping the door frame. "What happens Friday?" I asked through the open window. He glanced around like there were cameras on every porch. "You will thank me," he murmured as the driver stared. I told the driver to go and kept recording. At the office, I headed straight to it. "Lock my account," I said with measured calm. "Someone is meddling," I added as my hands trembled. They checked the logs and frowned at a timestamp. Home IP morning hour, unauthorized draft in my name. I stepped into a quiet room and called him. "Did you touch my email?" I asked with steady tone. Silence stretched like rope pulled too tight and thin. A breath, a cough, then a laugh that tripped. The line clicked dead and the ceiling seemed closer. "I booked a meeting with my boss for noon." "Something is off at home," I said without flinching. She studied my face and asked if I felt safe. "I am alert," I answered because fear is fuel. She nodded and asked to see the audit screenshots. On my way out, he texted a dinner invitation. "Friday night with friends," the message glowed like a trap. "Wear the blue dress," the next bubble chimed with cheer. I typed back a single line with no emoji. "I will come and I will bring receipts." At dusk, I found the spare keypad still unchanged. I reset the code and tested it twice with care. A small suitcase waited by the couch like a witness. I lined up documents, charger, and a clean shirt. The router stayed missing and the air felt charged. Water ran in the bathroom and then stopped. He stepped out with a towel and a grin. "Made a reservation," he said while checking my face. I nodded and let the silence hang heavy. His smile thinned as the door clicked behind him. He met me at the doorway with my tote half unzipped. A thumb brushed past my work badge like it belonged to him. "Lunch together tomorrow," he murmured while checking my eyes. "Calendar locked," I answered and slid past his shoulder. His jaw worked once and then went still like stone. My phone buzzed with an unknown number during coffee. A voice asked if I confirmed a resignation request this morning. I stared at the screen and kept my breathing even. "Send the copy," I said and opened my notebook. Whoever pushed that button was still inside my life. It pinged with a full trace and a screenshot. The draft matched my tone too perfectly for comfort. I saved everything to a folder named for a project. My hands shook, but the cursor stayed steady and calm. I knew I would need proof before the weekend exploded. A courier dropped a package from a boutique spa. Inside lay a gift card with his clipped handwriting. Unplugged before dinner, the note read underlined twice. I logged into our joint account and called the bank. I froze transfers and requested alerts on every penny going out. He texted a photo of a table set for our four. His message promised conversations and care if I aligned. I replied with a thumbs up and nothing extra. Backing away keeps loud people loud enough to reveal themselves. He sent a heart and then went quiet for hours. I walked to HR with my evidence in a folder. We sat close and kept our voices low and firm. Security will flag unusual access from home networks, the rep said. They asked if I had somewhere safe for the night. I answered because I would by sunset. The locksmith arrived before dusk and changed the cylinder fast. I paid in cash and watched for cars that slowed twice. My suitcase waited by the couch and made me breathe faster. I tucked documents under a sweater and zipped the lining. I kept the hoodie on because leaving must look ordinary tonight. He arrived early with a grin and a bag. He dropped it on the table and turned my face. "Tomorrow is big," he whispered near my forehead with warmth. I held his wrist and stepped back one deliberate pace. "Nothing is decided," I said and kept my eyes open. He followed me to the kitchen with his voice light. "You thrive at home," he offered while opening a drawer. I watched his hands move where my keys used to live. He closed the drawer and leaned on his elbows like a coach. I let the silence stretch until he checked his watch. A group chat popped up with names from his side. Cousin offered to mediate if I felt confused or tired. Brother promised laughter and a ride if my schedule allowed. I typed one line asking for a neutral meeting place. 3 thumbs appeared and a location pin hit my screen. I stepped onto the balcony and called my sister. "I might need a couch," I whispered as traffic hummed. "Door is open," she answered without asking for details. "Bring the charger and those files you love," she added gently. I nodded at air and stared at the city like a witness. Back inside, he stood with my laptop open and casual. "Let me help you draft your notice," came soft like honey. I closed the lid with a firm touch and a breath. "Do not touch that device," I said with a quiet stare. He smiled like a teacher who knows the pop quiz answer. He reached for my phone and I stepped sideways fast. Fingers brushed my sleeve and then curled into his palm. "Trust me," he urged as if care could be commanded. I turned on the camera and held it waist high. He noticed and smoothed his shirt with slow, careful movements. We ate in near silence while notifications kept landing. "Friends confirmed tomorrow at 7 with upbeat exclamation marks. I wrote the plan on a sticky note and folded it. "Bring copies, keep seat near exit, record from pocket, call after." My chest settled as the steps clicked into place like gears. He cleaned with exaggerated calm and checked the deadbolt twice. "Sleep early," he suggested while adjusting picture frames by the hall. I walked past him to the bedroom and locked the door. He paused on the other side for a long minute. The doorknob turned once and then stopped like a test. I lay awake counting his footfalls and message tones. At midnight he laughed with someone on speaker for a second. A male voice promised support if I froze under pressure. He lowered the volume when the floor creaked under his heel. I stared at the ceiling and rehearsed tomorrow like battle drills. Near dawn, I slipped my documents into a different tote. I placed the decoy near the couch where he would look. He woke to the alarm and reached for a hug. I led him and held still like a marker on paper. My heartbeat slowed as I saw the path through the day. He lifted the tote near the couch and peeked inside. His brow eased when he saw files that did not matter. I zipped the decoy and set it by the door. My real documents slid under my coat and stayed there. He watched my hands and tried to read edges. I texted the neighbor and asked for a minute at 9. Her knock arrived like a cue I had rehearsed all night. He opened the door and turned to fetch the bag. I slipped past them with the right tote and keys. The elevator closed and my pulse finally caught up. In the garage, I stashed the evidence under the spare tire. The snapshot went a cloud backup with the location tag. I checked the camera app and cleared the preview history. If he checked my phone later, he would find nothing. I walked out like I had only grabbed coffee money. At work, the noon meeting started on the exact minute. My boss placed a printout between us with careful hands. A payroll change request tried to reroute my next deposit. The request used my employee ID and an old address. It matched the attempt to our home network again. I filled a form and reset two-factor on every portal. Security added a rule that blocked outside access entirely. They asked if I anticipated more interference before the evening. Yes, I answered because denial wastes precious hours when hunted. They offered a guard to escort me to the curb. A receptionist pinged me that a man waited downstairs. He cradled a bakery box and tried to look harmless. Send him away, I typed and closed the chat. He loitered by the revolving door and phoned 3 contacts. A guard walked over and the box disappeared under his arm. He texted a selfie from the lobby with practiced charm. "Let me take you home early," the caption glowed. I replied with a meeting photo and a short line. "See you later," I wrote and locked my screen. He sent a heart sticker that curdled in my throat. On my break, I mapped the restaurant tables from memory. I messaged my sister to sit near the corner wall. She would film only if voices turned sharp or threatening. HR volunteered to drop by as a regular customer nearby. 2 angles would make denial very hard tonight. A new notification hit my inbox just after 2. A calendar invite attempted to cancel my staff briefing. It carried my signature and a polite reason that wasn't mine. I reopened the event and locked edit rights to admins. Then I created a rule that forwarded fakes to legal. He called with a tone like a coach before kickoff. "Wear something soft tonight," he urged with a little laugh. I let silence do the work that words could not. He breathed through his nose and waited for me to bend. "See you at 7, I said and ended the call. I printed a letter on company stationery with fresh ink. It confirmed my role, my performance, and no plans to resign. I folded it flat and slid it behind my phone case. If anyone pushed from his side, I would display it calmly. There would be no room for spin at the table. On the sidewalk, I watched for his car and kept moving. He idled at the corner and tapped the horn once. I waved like a neighbor and walked to the rideshare. He rolled forward and blocked the driver with a smile. The driver leaned out and asked if I needed police. "Follow 3 cars back," I told the driver quietly. He nodded and traced a slow line through traffic. My screen recorded the route and streamed to the cloud. A message from my sister popped up with a thumbs. She already sat near the back with water in hand. I reached home early and found him folding laundry neatly. He glanced at the lock and then at my face. "House is peaceful when you prioritize us," he murmured. I placed my work badge in my pocket and stared. He noticed the badge and his jaw tightened without warning. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small envelope. "Sign tonight and I cover next month completely," he offered. The paper showed a typed resignation with a blank line. I took a photo and slid it back without comment. He smiled like the outcome had already been purchased. I walked to the bathroom and texted the locksmith receipt. My sister replied with a check mark and a tiny anchor. That anchor felt like breath after surfacing from deep water. I pocketed the phone and studied my reflection with focus. Resolve changes posture before it changes anything else. He knocked on the door lightly and called my name. "Friends are waiting," came through the wood with forced cheer. I counted to 5 and opened the door slowly. He stepped back and looked me up and down once. I passed him and left the envelope on the table. Outside, he offered a ride and dangled the car keys. "I booked my own," I answered and walked to the curb. He followed 3 steps behind and kept pace with me. A car pulled up and I opened the rear door. He leaned in close and whispered that tonight would settle everything. I sat back and met his eyes through the window. "Bring your best," I said and lifted my phone. The rideshare pulled away and he flattened his smile. He turned toward his car and made a quick call. I watched his mouth form the word intervention before traffic cut him off. I reached the restaurant first and chose the chair facing exits. My sister lifted a glass in the corner and kept her phone low. I slid the company letter under my napkin and kept my hands steady. The plan felt simple until his group walked in like a wave. He kissed my cheek and pulled a chair close to mine. 2 friends took the flanks while his brother hovered by the aisle. A practiced smile spread across the table like a script. I nodded once and let the silence force someone to start. "Tonight is about alignment," his mother began while smoothing a placemat. He touched my wrist and gave a tiny reassuring nod. I placed my wrist in my lap and waited. He leaned back and scanned faces like a host before a toast. "We worry about you," the cousin offered with a sympathetic shrug. "Work drains you," one friend added while tapping a glass lightly. "Home would give balance," the other chimed in with confidence. The circle had closed before I took a breath. I reached into my pocket and tapped record without flourish. "Who invited who?" I asked while keeping my voice even. He lifted 2 fingers like a conductor claiming credit. The first thread loosened and I watched his mother blink. He pushed a thin envelope toward my plate and smiled wide. "A solution," he announced with cheerful certainty that felt too bright. I opened it and found the same typed form as before. I slid it back untouched and kept my gaze steady. "Let me explain the benefits," he began with palms open. I raised the letter from my boss and set it between us. "Read it," I said and held the paper with 2 fingers. He glanced, then looked away as if the words stung. His brother leaned in with elbows planted like anchors. "You can always reapply later," he suggested with careful cadence. I pulled out my phone and placed it face up. The timestamp from the fake payroll change glowed on display. "You went into her accounts," my sister's voice cut from behind. She stood by the wall, already filming with steady hands. His friends shifted in their chairs and checked each other. He flashed them a quick grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Everyone relax," he said while spreading his arms wide. "We just want the best," his mother whispered into her glass. I turned my phone toward them and pressed play quietly. The earlier lobby call rolled out in his own voice. "Sign tonight and I cover next month," the recording played steadily. He reached for the device and I lifted it out of reach. The manager angled closer from the host stand like a referee. My sister adjusted her stance and widened her frame. He tried a laugh that died before it found air. The cousin cleared his throat and stared at the envelope. "This looks bad," the cousin muttered while scratching his jaw. I waited because waiting makes truth speak louder. He leaned forward with his hand around his water like a grip. "You know I protect us," he murmured with eyes on mine. "Protection does not forge documents," I answered with calm cadence. The manager coughed once and stayed within earshot like insurance. One friend raised both palms and appealed for peace quickly. "Let's compromise," he offered as if numbers could soothe harm. I unfolded the letter and read the final line out loud. "My employment remains active and in good standing, effective immediately." His brother shifted and dropped a napkin beneath the table. I followed the motion and found a second envelope near my shoe. I picked it up and saw a notarization line left blank. He watched me find it and tightened his jaw until it ticked. "You prepared 2 versions," I said while holding the second page. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a small stamp. My stomach turned, but my voice stayed slow and cool. "You brought a notary seal to dinner," I said as proof. His mother touched his arm and whispered his name with warning. He pulled the stamp back and slid it toward his pocket. I stood and moved 1 chair farther from his reach. My sister moved 2 and lined up with the manager. He smiled again and changed approach like a quick pivot. "Take a 30-day break," he urged in a softer tone. "No quitting, just pause, we prove it works." He tapped the second envelope twice and held it out. I let the pause grow until the room carried our breath. "Send the router back home," I answered and tipped my head. He blinked once because the reference landed like a pebble. He recovered fast and tried a different path around me. "Delete the recordings," he suggested while drawing circles on the table. My sister raised an eyebrow and adjusted her grip on the phone. The manager stepped closer with a practiced, careful smile. I met the manager's eyes and gave a tiny nod. "Is everything all right?" the manager asked in a measured tone. "We may need a quieter table," I replied without looking away. He gestured toward a booth near the cameras and waited. We moved as a unit while my heart learned a new rhythm. In the booth I placed 3 items in a straight line. The company letter, the screenshot of the payroll reroute, the audio. He watched the row and drummed his fingers twice before stopping. "Which one is false?" I asked and kept my breathing steady. No one answered because the proof arranged itself on its own. He examined each piece like a buyer checking a used car. His friends stared at their hands and avoided the phone completely. His mother's mouth pressed thin as a knife. He exhaled through his nose and made a choice. Fine, the email was wrong, he admitted with a tight shrug. Wrong is the word, I replied and tapped the record icon. Keep going, my sister added from just outside the frame. He shifted again and tried to move the line of proof. The bank withdrawal helped plan all this, he offered quickly. Return it tonight, I responded and watched his shoulders slump. Every cent, I added because precision matters when power shifts. The cousin checked his watch and scraped back his chair. We cannot mediate this, he muttered and stood slowly. One friend followed with a stiff nod toward the door. The circle thinned until only family and the manager stayed. He looked smaller now, but the stubborn spark still flickered. Last chance, he murmured and tapped the envelope once more. I slid it across the table to his mother instead. She placed it in her purse and zipped it without hesitation. The manager asked if we needed the check or more time. Time, I answered and kept my view locked on him. Through the window, I saw HR take a seat near the bar. Our eyes met for half a second and then moved on. He noticed the glance and followed it to the bar. His mouth tightened as recognition dawned like a slow dawn. You brought work here, he whispered with disbelief and edge. I held the letter up and let the company crest speak. He straightened and smoothed his jacket like settling armor. Then let us vote, he announced to the small circle. My sister laughed once and shook her head at the idea. I leaned forward and spoke before he built momentum. There is nothing to vote on, I said without raising volume. This is my career and my account and my signature. He stared long enough to measure whether I would flinch. I did not. He blinked first. The room waited. He pushed back from the table and stood too fast. The stamp fell from his pocket and rolled under a chair. The manager bent to pick it up and held it away. We all looked at the stamp like a trigger on the floor. Keep that here for now, I told the manager evenly. He nodded once and slipped it behind the counter quietly. My sister widened her stance and steadied her phone again. He stared at his empty pocket and weighed his next move. He pulled out his wallet and tossed a card toward the check. Dinner is covered, he declared with a theatrical sweep of his hand. He looked from me to his mother like waiting for rescue. No rescue came. The silence stretched until he had to fill it. I will walk outside, he announced and headed for the door. His mother stood halfway as if to follow, then sat back. I counted 3 beats and rose with my sister behind me. We followed him out into the night and the open street. He paced by the curb and rubbed his temples hard. I stopped 2 steps away and kept my shoulders square. My sister held the camera low and steady like a metronome. The money first, I said and watched his jaw flex. He pulled out his phone and opened the banking app. Transfer pending, he muttered while angling the screen toward me. Cancel pending, I answered and nodded at the amount. He swallowed, then hit reverse and typed my account with care. A text pinged my device and confirmed the return landed. Full balance, I said while the second alert chimed. He winced and pocketed the phone without another glance. I waited because quick wins make stubborn people frantic. He tried a softer tone and reached for my sleeve. I stepped back and let his hand hang in air. Router, I said and held out my palm flat. He blinked twice, then unlocked his car with a short beep. He popped the trunk and lifted a tote with wires. I saw the unit and the cables coiled in place. He hesitated like a gambler counting chips before folding. I took the device and placed it in my bag. My sister moved closer and spoke without raising volume. Delete the email drafts while we stand here, she urged. He opened his inbox and scrolled with jerky motions. I watched the trash fill and then cleared it again. A patrol car rolled by and slowed at the corner. The manager stood in the doorway with folded arms and caution. He nodded toward me like a quiet witness ready nearby. I lifted my phone and flashed the recording timeline like proof. End this tonight, I said and kept my tone even. No more accounts, no false messages, no surprise gatherings. He looked at the street like it could feed him lines. I stayed silent until he ran out of places to look. He pulled a slim card from his wallet and fidgeted. Counselor on standby, he offered while avoiding my eyes. I shook my head and pointed at the restaurant door. Apologize to your mother for dragging her into this. He exhaled sharply and walked back inside with a stiff back. I followed with my sister and stopped near the host's stand. His mother rose as we approached and clutched her purse. He kissed her cheek and whispered while keeping his distance. I am leaving for a week, I announced to the table. No contact beyond email for logistics, I added slowly. My sister recorded their faces as the boundary landed hard. He stared at the manager like he wanted a ruling. HR stepped from the bar and greeted me by name. They glanced at the group and then at my tote. I will walk you out, they offered in a calm voice. He stiffened as we turned toward the door again. On the sidewalk, HR handed me a printed sheet discreetly. Emergency helpline and security contact, they said with a nod. I tucked it into my pocket and felt my breath deepen. Small tools help courage stand up without theatrics. He followed to the curb and write a final bargain. 30 days off, he urged with open palms and urgency. 2, I answered and raised 2 fingers like a referee. 2 messages total from you, both about logistics only. His brother stepped outside and scanned the street nervously. We will take him home, he offered with a tight smile. He placed a hand on the shoulder and guided him back. I studied the hand and saw the family line wobble. The patrol car looped again and paused by the fire lane. An officer leaned out and asked if we needed assistance. We are good, I replied while holding the bag close. He looked between us and then pulled forward slowly. My sister ordered a ride and pointed at the arriving car. Couch is ready, she said while opening the rear door. I slid in and set the router on the floor. He watched from the entrance and pressed his lips into a line. As we pulled away, my phone buzzed 3 times in a row. First, a calendar invite to dinner next week appeared unwanted. Then a text asking for keys he still possessed landed. Finally, an email with a blank subject arrived without content. I forwarded everything to HR and then to a new folder. Paper trail keeps me sane, I told my sister quietly. She nodded and handed me a water bottle without comment. I drank and watched the city smear past like a map. At her place, I locked the door and checked my alerts. The reverse transfers held and the balance matched my notes. I placed the router on the table and powered it. A familiar network name blinked awake like a heartbeat. I opened my laptop and reset every credential with fresh codes. Numbers replaced guesses and backup synchronized in steady waves. I uploaded the audio and the photos to a separate drive. When the progress bar finished, I finally let my shoulders drop. My sister curled on the other end of the couch and watched me. You look tall again, she whispered with a small grin. I closed my eyes for a beat and let that land. Tomorrow would be phone calls and locks and a lawyer's name. Before sleep, I typed 1 line and stared at it. I keep my job and my signature belongs to me. I sent it to myself and pinned it at the top. The line glowed like a promise I intended to keep. I woke to 3 missed calls and 1 voicemail marked urgent. I hit play with my thumb and listened to his quick pitch. Meet me at the apartment by 9, he pressed between breaths. I texted 1 line back with a time and a witness. My sister drove while I emailed the attorney's intake form. I attached the recordings and the banking confirmations with timestamps. He replied fast with a draft notice ready to send. I printed it at her office and slid it into my folder. At the curb outside our building, he waited with folded arms. No smile this time, just a tight look and a fixed stance. Keys first, I said as I stepped onto the sidewalk. He reached into his pocket and hesitated on purpose. Keys, I repeated and held out an open hand. He placed 1 ring down like it burned through his skin. I counted them and asked for the mailbox key too. He fished it out slower and watched my face for weakness. Inside the lobby, I called the locksmith from yesterday. Meet me in 20, I asked and gave the unit number. He heard and rolled his eyes like the outcome annoyed him. I swiped the elevator and stood where he could not crowd me. At the door, I started a video with audio low. He noticed and kept his distance with a practiced half smile. 5 minutes to grab work items, I said and set a timer. He nodded once and leaned against the wall outside the bedroom. I went straight to the desk and packed only essentials. Laptop, external drive, company badge, phone charger. He hovered in the hall and tracked each movement like a guard. I zipped the bag and held the strap across my shoulder. Talk to me, he urged as I moved past him. I am listening, I answered and rested my back against the door. You do not need rescuing, he insisted with palms up and urgent eyes. "I am not asking for rescue," I replied and watched him stall. He reached into a drawer and pulled a small velvet pouch. "Ring upgrade," he offered with a rehearsed softness and a shrug. "Trade the job for peace," he added while touching his chest. I set the pouch on the shelf and let it sit there. A knock cut through the hallway and the locksmith stepped in. He looked from me to the bag and read the room. "New code and cylinder?" he asked with a raised brow. "Yes," I answered and moved aside so he could work. Metal clicked and the old deadbolt landed in the locksmith's hand. He handed it to me like evidence and I pocketed it. My husband watched the exchange with a flat stare and clenched jaw. Power shifted an inch and I felt it under my feet. He tried a final swing and opened his email app. "Draft apology to your boss," he offered with a quick tap. "I will dictate," he started while clearing his throat for effect. "Close it," I sighed. And he froze with the screen glowing. The locksmith finished and requested a new passcode on the keypad. I entered numbers I would not forget and the unit beeped. "Done," the locksmith said and passed me a fresh set. My husband stared at the keys like they were slipping underwater. I took a breath that tasted like decisions and lifted the folder. The printed notice sat on top and waited for his eyes. "Here is formal separation pending counsel," I said without flinch. He scanned the header and his shoulders dropped for the first time. "You are doing this over pride," he muttered with a hard swallow. "I am doing this over control," I answered with a clear beat. "Control ends today," I added as I opened the door. He followed one step and then stopped at the threshold. In the hallway, he tried one last angle with a low voice. "Tell them we worked it out," he urged while rubbing his temple. "We did not," I said, and my phone camera stayed steady. He looked at the lens and finally stepped back into the room. Downstairs, I forwarded the signed page to the attorney. Subject line simple, effective date today, no wiggle room. He responded with meeting slots and a checklist for safety. I chose the earliest window and added my sister to the invite. My phone buzzed again with a new calendar attempt from him. The title promised coffee and closure at our usual spot. I declined and set a filter to auto-archive his invites. Then I created a single rule for my boundaries in writing. Outside the building, he called after me from the stairs. "I handled our bills," he announced like a savior on stage. "Send receipts," I replied and kept walking to the curb. The patrol car from last night turned the corner and slowed. I waved the officer over and explained the new locks quickly. He took notes and asked if I expected more trouble today. "I expect attempts," I answered and pointed at the upstairs window. The officer nodded and said they would circle for a while. In the car, my sister waited with the engine running. "Forward everything to cloud again," she reminded with a glance. I synced the latest files and checked the confirmation stamps. Every important thing now lived somewhere he could not touch. Back at her place, I dialed HR for a quick call. "Status clear and continuing," they confirmed with crisp efficiency. They asked if I needed additional support from corporate security. "Yes, for the next week," I replied and heard my voice steady. Afternoon slid into meetings and a calm held in my chest. Not peace, not victory, just a boundary that finally stood. He tried 2 texts that fit within the limit we set. I archived both and answered only the one about logistics. Before sunset, the attorney called with a measured rundown. Temporary orders, digital protections, documentation preserved. "We can file Monday," he concluded with professional certainty. "Do it," I said and felt the floor stop tilting. I ended the day at my sister's kitchen table with tea. I typed a short message to myself and read it twice. "Work stays, marriage pauses until respect returns." I pinned it and closed the laptop while the screen still glowed.